To this day, Velka remains one of the most mysterious and still largely talked about characters in the entire Dark Souls series. She is one of those characters where you can play the entire series but still be completely oblivious to her existence. But once you do discover her, there is a lot of information to uncover, and depending on how you look at things, she may or may not have had a larger impact on the earlier events within the Dark Souls timeline. Many view her to be in direct opposition of Lord Gwyn, whereas some view her to be a neutral force who would deal out punishment for sins regardless of status. But before I start jumping down rabbit holes, let's first take a look at what we do know about Velka. And like I just said, she dealt out punishment for sins because Velka was widely known as being the goddess of sin. How exactly she handed out these punishments, I'm not quite sure. There's not a lot of information about it, there's not many examples out there. But one thing we do know is that the gods definitely did fear her. She was considered a rogue deity, and that's probably because she had no allegiance to one side or the other. In her eyes, a sinner is a sinner, regardless if you're a human or a lord. And interestingly enough, Lord Gwyn is widely believed to have committed the first sin, and as Oswald of Karim would say, it's only human to sin. And given how lowly Lord Gwyn viewed the humans, it must have been quite insulting for this god to be compared to humans, as he too is guilty of sinning. It is widely believed within the community that for some reason Velka intended to kill the gods. Numerous items relating to Velka, including a rapier that does occult damage which gods are weak to, are found locked away within the painted world of Ariamis, and that the giant crow that transports the chosen undead from the Northern Undead Asylum to Lordran is in fact a messenger of Velka, sending the chosen undead to kill the gods on her behalf. There isn't much reasoning to support why she would want to kill the gods, unless of course she is pro-linking the fire, but most people seem to believe that she wants the gods dead out of some rite of vengeance or for malicious intent, and that's not something I personally believe. Yes, Velka's rapier does do occult damage, which the gods are weak to, and the title itself is a possessive name, Velka's rapier, but the description of the weapon tells us that it is used by a pardoner and not actually Velka herself. As for the crow that transports the chosen undead to Lordran, I too see that in the best interest of the gods that happened, that you get a chosen undead that becomes powerful enough to success Lord Gwyn as a Lord of Cinder and link the flame. Now you could make the argument that it was all part of Velka's devious plan to send the crow to transport the chosen undead to Lordran to slaughter all of the gods, and then in the end she would trick you into not linking the fire and ushering in an Age of Dark. But to the best of my knowledge, there's absolutely nothing to suggest that Velka wanted the Age of Fire to end and for the Age of Dark to begin. The Book of the Guilty is overseen by Velka, and it is a list of sinners who have disrespected the gods and their covenants. This item shows that Velka is indeed cooperating with the gods when it comes to disrespect and sin. If Velka opposed the gods' rules so much, would it not make sense for her to reward those who disrespect the gods rather than to punish them? But instead Velka would overlook her list of those who are guilty and determine the severity of their sin, while Gwendolyn's Darkmoon Blades would mete out the punishment. Now I know people bring up that originally in Dark Souls 1 there was going to be a covenant linked to Velka, which players will hunt Darkmoon Blades, thus proving that Velka and the gods are indeed enemies, but this is cut content and it's cut for a reason. It may have made sense at one point during development, but eventually From Software for whatever reason decided to remove it and rework the story a little bit. And because that is cut content, I do not consider that any form of tangible evidence whatsoever. It's cut content. We're not supposed to know about it in the first place, so obviously it's not important. And even though I do enjoy lore speculation and hearing other people's ideas, I think Velka is one of those characters where people have just gone way too far and just blown her importance way out of the water. I'm not quite sure why, but there's almost this kind of desperation when it comes to trying to link the identity of Velka to just any random NPC that pops up. And if I was to give my very own opinion on Velka and her lore, I think in the grand scheme of things she really is not that important, and if anything she kind of just serves as a lore explanation to a game mechanic, which is absolution. Anyone who has played Demon Souls will know that if you accidentally aggro an NPC, then you can never de-aggro them unless you kill them or go into a new game plus cycle, which would potentially ruin your game if you accidentally aggroed someone like a blacksmith or stockpile Thomas. And in most cases you are probably better off starting a brand new character rather than going through the entire game without these valuable NPCs. This was among some of the top requested things to be patched out of the game, but sadly Demon's Souls never fixed it. And even though it is possible to accidentally aggro NPCs in Dark Souls 1, you can now rectify the problem with the absolution mechanic. And rather than just getting absolution and that being it, From Software decided to give it a nice little lore tie-in, which is somewhat similar as to how PvP and co-op works in this game. Rather than just PvPing and co-oping, there is lore tied to it. And that's basically how I view Velka. She's a minor world building character that makes a game mechanic that bit more believable. If I was to use another character as an example of this, just think of Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth. Rather than just reallocating your stats and respeccing your character, there's a nice little lore story tied into it just to make it that bit more believable. There's not these huge speculations about Rosaria, and that's because not everything has to have these massive implications, and I think in the case of Velka, it just got blown out of proportion for some reason. I'm not saying that Velka is an irrelevant character, but let's just imagine that she never existed. How much different would the main events of the Dark Souls storyline be?